This is episode number 2 with Dean Lane, Information Technology Executive and Leader, founder of the Office of the CIO, author, and Navy SEAL.
I took the history of jazz. I took abnormal psychology. I took chemistry. I took physics. And you get the idea. So the point is, the warning is, you can be on the journey, but if you don't have focus and direction, then you'll have what happened to me. In the 4th year, they came to me and they said, sorry, we don't see an English major here. As a matter of fact, we don't see any kind of major at all.
Welcome to Titans of Transition, featuring real-life stories, anecdotes, and inspiration about pivotal career moments from leaders who have been there. Join host Joe Miller, former scientist and senior technology leader turned executive coach, as he unpacks transitional moments to help inspire change.
Hi friends, Joe Miller here. I'm very happy to share with you my conversation with Dean Lane. Dean is a true titan of transition, from his early days as a Navy SEAL or frogman to executive leadership in information technology. He's held various senior leadership roles, starting with Honeywell, then on to Ernst & Young, Morton Thiokol, Plantronics, and AT&T, just to name a few. Dean shares with us a number of pearls of wisdom here on how to navigate transition in your career and your life. Please join me now in my conversation interview with Dean Lane. Dean, I'd like to welcome you to the podcast today.
Thank you, Joe. It's great to be here.
Just take us through sort of a thumbnail of your background, starting out from the early days of your career and what you've done and the different sort of venues you've played in.
Okay, well, when I came out of the Navy, I went to work for what is now Honeywell. I came in as a systems analyst, even though I didn't have any background in that. The IT people were not pleased about that, because back then you started out as a programmer, what is now called a developer. And then you went to junior, or from junior to senior programmer, and then you became a supervisor and so on. And then you finally became an analyst. So I went to Control Data Institute 4 nights a week, 4.5 hours a night for 13 months to learn to code. And of course, that did me absolutely no good as an analyst. But as I was there, I was fortunate to have a vice president at the corporate level who was kind of managing my career. And so I spent time in IT, and then I spent time in operations, manufacturing operations. And so during my 11 years at what is now Honeywell, I ran the factory floor. I was the CIO. I had profit and loss responsibility for the F-18 and a number of other different positions. So that for me was like a PhD program, you know, without having to do all the writing and the studying. Aside from being in education, I developed skills in 2 different areas. One being IT or technology, and the other being actual company operations. A lot of difficulty in the IT world today is the divide between the end user, or the people who use the systems, and the people that maintain and build the systems. It's a different language, it's a different concept, Um, and so I was very fortunate to get both sides of the story, so to speak. And that then allowed me to migrate to different positions. I went from there to Ernst and Young because I thought consulting would be really sexy. You know, it was you take good care of you, and it was good for about a year and a half, 2 years, and then I got tired of being on the road all the time. I earned enough points flying around to take my entire family to the Bahamas for weeks with paying nothing. You know?
Hey, Dean, was there a bump that caused you to look for the sexier role, or when you were at the other?
Well, so I am pretty straightforward in what I'm looking for, and so when I work for somebody, I was working for the CEO at what is now Honeywell, and I did something spectacular in terms of inventory control, and so he wasn't going to move me. I was stuck in that position, and I kept talking to him and said, you've got to move me, and he kept saying, yeah, a couple of months will move you. Well, that went on for 6 or 8 months. And it became apparent to me that he wasn't going to move me. And so I moved myself and found a different path, if you will. And I stayed with Ernst & Young. They wanted me because I had both skill sets, both the operational side and the IT side. And so when you're a consultant, there's only 2 things that matter. One is billable hours and the revenue you can bring in terms of sales. So that's why they wanted me. I stayed there for 2 years, and I was actually headhunted out of there by Morton Thiokol and became the CIO of the corporate office there in Ogden, Utah. So I was the IT department for the rocket scientists for about 4 years.
We talked about this a while ago, Dean. It's interesting around, I don't know the same time frame or not, but I started as an analytical chemist at a chemical company, pharmaceutical company in Boulder, Colorado. And we actually made one of the catalyst materials for Morton Thiokol. So it's an interesting connection. I just
for the rocket fuel, yeah.
Yeah, the catalyst, the burn, basically for the fuel, which was
it was a great job.
Yeah.
And Utah was wonderful. The Mormon people are really family oriented. They have great work ethic. I had good people in the IT departments. It was a good experience. But then it was like I'd done everything that I was intending to do there. It was time to move on. There was a man at Plantronics that had worked for me when we were in the Navy. And he had just become the CIO at Plantronics and said, well, why don't you come in and you can be the director, and I'll be gone in 24 months anyways. So I went and did the interview, but at the same time, AT&T came and found me. So I did 2 years with the Teradata Group, which was owned by NCR, and NCR was owned by AT&T at the time. Mm-hmm. And when they did the divestiture, I went back to Plantronics and became the CIO there. I looked at the offer from Plantronics, and I looked at the offer from AT&T. I talked it over with the guy who was going to hire me at Plantronics, and we decided that I should go to AT&T, and he'd call me in 18 to 24 months to come and take that position, which is what I did. And I stayed at Plantronics until Y2K. which, oh, by the way, was the most successful project anywhere in the world, primarily because management was involved, and it had an immovable completion date. But after that, I went to the management and said, I need to move on. I'd been there 5 years. They made me stay on call till the end of the year 2000, but I did move on.
So Dean, and it's an observation here. I just noticed. I mean, you said a couple of times it was time for me to move on. So is it part of what's? I'm just going to take a shot at this. Part of what drives you is to make sure you're in a situation where you can drive transformation or transition into for a company, and then after a while, I'm just kind of curious about that.
Yeah, there are several things that go into it. One is, am I adding value? Do I feel like I'm influencing the direction of the company, or at least of the IT department? That's one consideration. The other is have I gotten to the point where my contributions are less and less and less because I've changed it enough to where it's effective, and it's like when you get to the 90 or 95% level, getting that last few percentage points, yes, is very difficult.
Curve flattens in another way.
So that's one factor. The other thing I do is I have an exercise that I do on my birthday every year. I take and I brainstorm with myself all the things that are important to me. So, do I want a big office? Do I need a company car? Am I concerned about the commute, the length of the commute? Is money important? Do I need a big organization? I mark all these things down on a piece of paper, and then after a day or two, because you can't just do it in one session, you have to come back to it. When I've got the list complete, I pretend that that's a silent auction, and I have $1,000, an imaginary $1,000. So if I say a company car is the most important thing in the world, I can put the $1,000 against the car, but then I'm not going to get anything else. Okay. So if I say the car and an office with my name on the doors are the two most important things, I could put 500 on each, but then I might not get anything else. So you get the idea.
Yeah.
The other complicating factor is I pretend that you, Joe, or somebody is at that silent auction and they have $1,000 too. And that just puts pressure on yourself to really figure out, what are the important things? When you struggle with it enough, you come away with a prioritized list of what's important to you. And that allows you then to think about that, contemplate it, whatever wording you want, but take it in and then look around at where you are. Are you living the life that you just defined in this exercise? Or are you just kind of on the, are you a gopher or a mouse on the treadmill? Are you just doing it because you do it?
This is an annual process for you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I'm not suggesting change just for change's sake. On the other hand, you don't want to get into a rut. Think about it this way, for technology people, this is the way to think about it. 35 years ago, I learned to program in COBOL. What if I never did anything else? What if I just stayed there with COBOL, okay? Probably in some far reaches of the country, there's a need for a COBOL developer. But the answer is that you need to stay current, you need to stay refreshed, and you need to be looking towards the future. It's not good to look in the rearview mirror, unless you're trying to understand an experience that you had and then apply it. But the other thing I would say is that you don't get something by waiting for it.
Yeah.
So,
very interesting. You've applied sort of what we would normally do in a business context to your own personal life. I mean, doing an annual assessment of where you stand, what the impact is, and are you reaching your long range vision for an organization is very common. But it's interesting that my coaching with folks across different industries, but often in technology space, I'm kind of surprised that they don't apply these same sort of techniques to their own situation.
Well, sometimes it's the results of what you come up with are pretty surprising. So Honeywell is a giant company. Okay? So when I left there, I realized I didn't want to be at a company that big again. I could have stayed there, and in a year or two, I probably would have moved somewhere and had a different position within the company and so on. But you know what? A large company like that choose on you. They demand so much so if you're motivated and you want to make an impact and an influence, it requires time away from your children. It requires travel. It requires a whole bunch of things that I just didn't want to go through again. So if you look at the companies I went to, they got smaller and smaller until I started my own firm. That was my path. That was what I wanted to do. And as you pointed out, I discovered that by doing this analysis every year. Could have gone the other way. I could have been with a small company, done the analysis and say, my goal is to be the president of IBM. And that's another thing. It's important to set goals for yourself, even if you don't reach it right away, even if it changes after a year. But you have to have goals and you have to have objectives. And what I would say is, what I did was I'd set a goal and I then would work the problem backwards. Okay, so I want to be Joe's neighbor. Okay, that's my goal. Well, Joe lives far away, so how does that happen? Well, what happens right before I'm going to be Joe's neighbor? Well, I have to buy a house right next to Joe. Okay, well, what happens before I buy a house? Well, I have to have the money. Well, how do I get the money? Well, I have to sell my house. So you can see you work backwards from your goal to where you are, and then you begin to execute those individual steps until you get there.
Right.
And like I say, if that were the situation, it might take me 3 years before I could become Joe's neighbor. Okay? So you have to be willing to endure and get there. And if things change later on and you're only halfway to where you're going, then change. If you're unhappy.
A good point that it's a journey and it's a longer process. I mean, I think a little brief story. I remember my second year of college, I was in Kentucky, going to college in Kentucky, and some friends of ours and my wife and I drove out to Colorado, and we decided to visit a certain area where my wife and I met outside of Buena Vista, and there's a mountain there, Mount Princeton. And my friend George and I decided, hey, let's go up to the top. And first of all, we weren't acclimated. But the other thing is we just decided we'd walk up to the top from the base of the mountain, which was probably about, 8,700 feet. We just started out early in the morning. We just started walking up to the top. And the one thing that's interesting, and I've used this analogy before with folks, and that is that later on in the early afternoon, we thought we were getting close. We came up on a shoulder, and then we had another view of the next shoulder, and then the next shoulder. And so the journey is a process where we get informed and we make discoveries. I like what you said about how you determined that you wanted to be part of a different kind of an organization, or maybe a smaller organization, or maybe a different type of situation, or maybe you wanted to start your own thing. You don't know that at the very beginning. So this annual exercise is very powerful, where you actually take stock across these different areas of your life and where you want to be, and what you want to change.
So two things. One is, I don't mean to demean large companies. It's quite possible that you would get a position within a company in which you're very happy, and you stay there. If you became, I know, I'm now working with a man who was the CIO at Bechtel Corporation. He's half retired. Okay, they've got him on retainer right now, and he was there for 20 years or so, and he was happy. So if you're happy, then if you're doing the exercise and it comes out the same, then you're happy. You stay there. I would like to issue a warning, though. Okay, the warning is this. When I was an undergraduate student at UCLA, I was a declared English major. Okay? I took the language of Portuguese. I took celestial navigation. I took Scandinavian literature. I took the history of jazz. I took abnormal psychology. I took chemistry. I took physics. You get the idea. So the point is, the warning is, you can be on the journey, but if you don't have focus and direction, then you'll have what happened to me. In the fourth year, they came to me and they said, sorry, we don't see an English major here. As a matter of fact, we don't see any kind of major at all. And so, and so I had to scramble to complete the requirements, because if you have too many credits, they just throw you out because they want to discourage professional students. But the point behind the story is, you can be having a good time and loving the journey and all this, but you may not, you may be going in a circle, which is what I did while I was in college. So that's the warning, is make sure you stay focused.
This is rich stuff, Dean. I want to pivot a little bit here and talk a little bit about the Office of the CIO for a few minutes, if we can. And in particular, I wanted to sort of point out something else that I've seen in you, kind of affirm this in you, is how great you are of building relationships and advocating
Thank you.
for others. And just for everyone's benefit, I joined the Office of the CIO again when I was in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, at a biopharmaceutical company in Berkeley. But I found out pretty quickly that, and it was a very unique setup with this networking group that I was in. You had sort of two different legs to this organization, but the networking group had obviously a lot of other IT leaders, CIOs from various different industries. You brought lots of great speakers in, you provided tons of value, but there was a real community piece there. And the thing I'm going to end on was that you didn't discontinue your relationship with these CIOs just because they had had a job transition, or maybe they had moved out of the position they were in, or they were trying to discover what they wanted to do next. I can remember sitting near a beach near Cabo when we went on a joint fishing trip, just having conversations with these different leaders, men and women. And it was a powerful community. So there was more to you than just what might be on your resume. And I really appreciate that about you, Dean. Talk to me and talk to the group a little bit about the Office of the CIO and relationships and kind of that sort of angle of things.
Okay, so let's see. The Office of the CIO on the community side, which is what you were just talking about, was a membership. You became a member, and we had probably 25, maybe 30. It was all local. It was all face-to-face. There was no thought about making it national. It was a local group, local motion, and everything we did was with that group. Although we charged dues to be a member of the group, we never took any of that money, except to use it for events for the members of the group. So as you pointed out, the fishing trip, we had enough money to pay for everybody's fishing, their room, their board, their alcohol, but they had to get there, they had to pay for the airfare on their own. We had other events. We had a bus that went up to Napa Valley and went and drank wine all day long and then drove back on the bus. And those events were completely paid for. The monthly meetings where we brought in speakers, the important thing there was to get an interesting topic. And the way we did that was to poll the membership. What would you like to see over the next 3 meetings? And then to ensure that the speaker, we reviewed their presentations before they presented. So that was important. So that was kind of the mechanics of the group, okay? But as you talked about, there's the whole relationship side. We took the CIOs and divided them up geographically. And I took people from the consulting side of the business. And I said, your job is to take these 2 CIOs or 3 CIOs out to lunch. And the only thing you're to accomplish there is to pay the bill. Okay, so what we were doing was getting the CIOs together in even smaller groups to make sure that the relationship was built. The only way you can build a relationship is by what you do. So if you and I, Joe, exchange a Christmas card once a year and we never talk during the year and we never see each other during the year, we never do anything during the year, then our relationship is a Christmas card once a year. Okay. But if every 3rd month, we meet in Las Vegas for dinner, or every Tuesday we have a phone call, that's a whole different relationship. And it's important to make sure that you're maintaining that contact. So when I go on vacation, if I go on vacation for 2 weeks, my goal, my objective, I send postcards. I send a minimum of 10 postcards every day. So that means in 2 weeks, 140 people will receive postcards. And I got news for you. People love to get snail mail because it's so rare anymore.
Unique.
And I normally send more than 10 in a day, to the point where my wife calls me Mr. Postcard. So that's just one way. Other ways are to remember when people say, "Oh yeah, I had my birthday last week," go put that in your calendar so you know when their birthday is, and just wish them a happy birthday. You can send a birthday message through LinkedIn. That's not as good, because that's an auto reminder that somebody else set up. So you want to make the effort, and it will be reciprocated.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. It's interesting, in technology leadership, we often talk about people, process, and technology, that triangle, those key elements for having a successful implementation or transition or transformation. As technologists first, usually people tend to focus first on actually technology, then maybe process. What's the business process that's wrapped around, or the solution will be utilizing. And people tends to actually come last. We say people, process, technology, but the people emphasis tends to come last. And in my experience, the people side tends to be more around how do I get these people on board and get ownership and make sure they don't become a problem for the project later on. But in my experience, the people element is the most important thing, and it goes way beyond what we normally do in technology. And so you talked about some very practical things there that make it personal. That's that element.
Yep.
The other thing is that it is actually fundamental to doing anything and making any significant impact on the world and leaving any legacy. And I think that
That's right.
doesn't get said enough. And it's part of, I know the way you mentored your CIO associates, Office of the CIO, and others. And so that's one of the things I've really respected about you, Dean, is that part has always been there, and it's been genuine. I never felt, and I know members of that community never felt, that you were doing it as some sort of lead generation process at all. Because, we haven't interacted in, I don't know, 15 years or 10 years or something in that context. And yet we've stayed in touch, so, and I know you do that with
absolutely.
So I think it's a good.
And not only you and I, but, Frank, who worked for you,
Right.
So sometimes you stay in contact with people through other people, how's Joe doing? Oh, I better call him and see what's going on. But I do want to tell you this, my first job as an IT person, okay? This is back at Honeywell, what's now Honeywell. The very first thing they asked me to do was to take 11 different forms and create a single form. Okay, they, over a period of years, to place a purchase order, the requisition, there were all kinds of requisitions. You could have it on a 3x5 card. Yeah, I mean, it was just a mess. Okay, so I thought, okay, I'll go do this. So I went off into the corner, okay, and I took all the 11 forms and I started a brand new form. And every time, like I put down the part name, then I crossed that off all the 11 forms. And part number, and I crossed that off all. Due date, I crossed that off all day. It took me, I don't know, a couple of 3 days, to make sure I hadn't missed anything. And I called a meeting of all the people that were going to be affected by this or had to implement it. And I said, okay, here it is. Here's the answer. I was lucky to escape with my life. They totally rejected it, okay? So I quickly understood exactly what you've just been saying. I left the people out. I focused on what was going to be the technology and the process. And I did it all by myself. Well, having realized that, I went back to square one. I met with every single person twice, individually, saying, here's where I am. What do you suggest? How should we do this, right? And that took about, 3 or 4 weeks. And at the end of that, I called a meeting. I brought back the exact same form that I had created, and they were in love with it. They thought this was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Why? Because they were invested in it, because they were included, and because there was a relationship that allowed them to accept it. So I can't tell you how important relationships are. The technology and the processes are maybe 10% of the project.
Yep.
And the other 80%, 90% is the relationship and having people help you figure it out.
Hey, Dean, can you tell us a little bit about what you're currently doing with Institute of World Politics in DC?
Oh my gosh. So I'll tell you what I was brought in to do, and then I'll tell you what I'm doing.
Let's talk about the first.
Not odd at all. So I was brought in to create a cyber intelligence program. So cyber intelligence is taking cyber capabilities, so, artificial intelligence and all those kinds of things, and marrying it to what is called statecraft. So counter-espionage, all kinds of different things that they use. Diplomacy, diplomacy goes back to the relationships, and can you use the technology? Yeah, you can use the technology to prompt you to do certain things. So it is just the marrying of the technology to all the articles of statecraft. And I created, not by myself, but I enlisted people to help, obviously, through relationships, to develop 11 courses, okay? And we developed 11 courses. And so that's what I was brought in to do. Since I was the only IT cyber guy, I quickly had another job, which was, every time we have a conference call, sometimes it drops all by itself. And, the network's not so fast, and, all the problems.
You should have hidden your resume, Dean.
Yeah, I should have tailored that to say only a few. So I'm doing that as well. And then the other thing is that the Institute of World Politics, first off, they're a graduate school that offers 5 master degrees and 1 doctoral program and 18 certificate programs. But they're all brick and mortar. There is no online learning. So the third thing that I'm doing with them is bringing up distance learning. So that's primarily what I'm doing for them. There's a little bit of marketing thrown in there. There's a little bit of go out and shake hands with some people to see if you can get them to come in, that kind of thing. Yeah. So there's a guy named Eric O'Neill who used to work for the FBI, and he was assigned to a guy named Robert Hansen, and his job was to get the goods on Robert Hansen. It's the biggest FBI bust in its history. They made a film about it called Breach. It's a movie, and it's a pretty interesting movie, and it does tell the story. Anyways, part of what I did was go out and get Eric O'Neill and convince him that he should come and be a speaker at the Institute. And he normally gets tens of thousands of dollars to speak, but I think we gave him an honorarium of like $500. He wanted to do it. So that's the idea. Is how do what is it I have to do to get you to do what I want you to do? That makes sense to you. And that's all part of the relationship, is not just coming in and say, all right, Joe, get to it. This is what I want. But, maybe do something where I get you interested in what I'm doing, and then allow you to help me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's quite a shift from the command control of your early Navy days, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, back then it's a little different. I mean, everybody's in the same boat, so to speak, and the consequences are a little more dire, and there's probably not enough time to take a vote. Who wants to take the hill? Anybody? And you're doing things that you may not want to do. So and it can be like that it can be like that in IT or any other profession. If the system is down, if everything's crashed, right, and you are dependent upon customers buying your product across the web, are we going to vote to see? No, you're going to go, Joe, you do this, Mary, you go do that.
It's like that old Hershey Blanchard, leadership model. Situational leadership model. You quickly have to go into directive mode. We're not going to worry so much about relationship. We have to execute. We have no margin for error. So just do it. So different scenarios for different situations. Hey, Dean, one thing that I like to include in these kinds of interviews with other Titans like yourself, is the old question, and we can phrase it however you want to phrase it, but it's basically, kind of advice would you offer to someone who is starting out, or maybe, just, worked a few years in their career, in terms of things to keep in mind, in particular, those who are tilt towards leading others, I would say, things that you've learned along the way, what things to listen for in yourself, when does shifts make sense? How do you navigate that it's time for a shift? Back to your point, are you headed in the right direction? All those kinds of things. What kind of advice would you offer those starting out?
Okay, so the first thing is to go and do the silent auction, so you know where you're going. The second thing is not to be impatient. Okay, you can't just graduate from school, get a job, and expect to be the chairman of the board. Okay, so don't forget it's a journey, and you have to start somewhere. Other things are, don't become jealous of others, or feel like you should have their job, or Joe got promoted and I didn't, all that stuff. That has nothing to do with your journey. Okay, if you're executing your journey, then those things don't matter. A very important thing is to do what I call good staff work. So Joe has asked me to look into buying a new laptop computer for the CEO. So I go out and I do the analysis, I put it all together, and I bring it to Joe. It should be complete. Okay, it should have all the answers. Maybe not necessarily in writing, but if I get asked, why did you select this? I need to be able to say why and not fumble. So when you do good staff work, you're supporting whomever it is that you're reporting to. And by doing so, you're taking some piece of responsibility or some task off their desk, and you're taking care of it. And then you're reporting back to them. And to the extent that you can do that and do it well, they're going to give you more and more and more to do, because not everybody functions like that. So those are the main things. Make sure you got your plan. Don't become impatient. Don't worry about all the politics that are going on around you, and do good staff work.
I really particularly like that one piece you were talking about not getting distracted by other success and getting your focus over there rather than your own journey.
That's right. Do your job. That's right.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention that you're an author as well. So you've written a book or two, have you not?
3 books.
You want to tell us about those just a little bit briefly? And I will provide a link at the bottom for folks who are interested in picking those up.
Okay, the first book is called CIO Wisdom. The second book is called CIO Perspectives. And the third book is called CIO Body of Knowledge. All these books were a collaborative effort with chief information officers. I was the editor, and that's not an easy job. I'm not complaining, it's just more than I thought it was going to be, and I can't believe I did it 3 times. But I wanted to stop after 2 books, but they told me that that wasn't a trilogy, so I had to do the 3rd book.
Yeah.
And every CIO participated in that agreed that any money that came in would go into a 5013C that we established called the CIO Scholarship Fund. And everybody associated with that 5013C is a volunteer. So all money that comes in goes to students who are in economic need. And that organization that I founded there, after writing the first book, we figured out we weren't Hillary. And so we weren't making as much on the books as she does. And we needed some other way to generate revenue. So we decided to go into the golf business, where we hosted a charity golf event once a year. And to date, we've given out over $1 million in scholarships to students who are in economic need.
Fantastic. It's fantastic. I know you have a golf event that gets sponsored out of the Bay Area as well, that's associated with. Still do? Yeah.
Still going.
Yeah. We both moved away. I wasn't quite sure if it's still going, but I'm glad to hear that it is. I think it was in Livermore for a number of years, wasn't it? Yeah.
That's right. They have it at the Wente Vineyard because it's the only golf course I know of where you can actually drink hard alcohol on the course.
Well, that's great.
That was important to the people who are coming to the event. You know?
Well, Dean, listen, I want to really
You have to know your customer.
I want to really thank you for being with us today. Oh my goodness, such a great time together. But again, thank you. And for those who are listening again, please do check out those books. I have several of them. They're great resources for leaders, in particular in the technology space, but many of the things that are shared, strategic planning, they apply to other areas as well. So Dean, thank you so much for joining us at the Titans of Transition.
Thank you for having me, Joe.
Thanks again for joining us today at the Titans of Transition podcast. Hope you enjoyed the show. Please subscribe and write us a review on Apple Podcast. If you're interested in digging in a little deeper, check those show notes for links and other materials I may provide. Share it around with your friends on social media and let them know about this podcast. Thanks again. Appreciate your support.